different in many, many ways than what you are familiar with in your own communities. And what you see that happens online mirrors and magnifies what happens offline. And that mirroring and magnification is actually really critical, because it means that the good, the bad, the ugly that you see offline comes in online. And what is weirder about that mirroring is that it's often the kinds of stuff that adults normally don't have access to that is mirrored. It is the conversations that happen in the school locker rooms. It is the conversations that happen behind closed doors, the things that actually put teens at risk, that normally parents wouldn't see that they now can see. And so typically the tendency is to blame the technology rather than realizing that there's a much broader, deeper problem or situation to actually address. And the other issue is that it magnifies it. And that magnification can be good, right? This is how you get 50,000 kids to stage a protest, because they've used the technology as a scaling force to realize that they can communicate with one another. It also means that when they want to torment one another, the magnification can be very great as well. But this process, it's very easy to look at the technology and assume that the technology is bad, and I worry about a lot of the band-aids that happen because they're often meant to get rid of what we can see rather than getting rid of the root causes. Over and over again, what I see from young people is that when they're in trouble offline, it seeps onto online, and they look for validation both from peers and from people beyond that if their peers are part of the problem. And this is actually where there's a set of danger to be made. There are two in particular kinds of offline dangers that I see, or offline home situations that I see put kids at risk. One is the abusive parenting situation. And this doesn't necessarily mean physically abusive, although it can. It means verbally abusive. It means absent. It means all sorts of negative home situations that make home a not safe place. One of the things that I often ask teenagers is how they perceive of home. And it's amazing how many see it as less of a private space than school. Right? Because the home is not safe for a lot of kids. And when it's not safe, they go online because online is more private than offline for them. They go there to seek, some sort of solace in communities that might not hurt them. I talked to a boy in Iowa who had just gotten out of the hospital because his father had beaten him up so badly, father being an alcoholic. And he kept running away, and the police kept bringing him back. Right? And it's a situation that's just, it's so heart-wrenching to watch. And he knows that he goes online, and that's his community of people that love him no matter what and aren't going to beat him up. On the opposite end of the spectrum, which is probably more familiar to some of you, is what happens when there's a level of pressure, unbelievable pressure that's placed on kids by their parents. The pressure to get into the Ivy League school, the pressure to get straight A's, the pressure to succeed. This is also almost always middle and upper class communities. And this is kids who are told that no matter what, they're not doing it right, they're not winning the games, they're not succeeding. And they're cracking. And their parents, most of them are extremely well-intentioned. And they really want their kids to succeed, but the pressure is breaking them. And when they see this kind of pressure, when they crack, they do some pretty damaging things. Some of this we see as self-harm, things like cutting, anorexia, bulimia. Some of this is reaching out to people who have more freedom online. Interestingly, I deal with a lot of these kids who are reaching out to older adults, right? Not 45-year-olds, but the aim is the college senior. The 21-year-old who has a car, who can get alcohol and who can get freedom. Right? And these are the people they want. They have this dream of freedom because their home, again, is not free. So they're desperately seeking it out. So when we look at all, the stories that we get, and I can't agree more with what we're hearing, they're hearing them too. They hear all of the predator stuff. The number of times that Dateline comes up in my interviews, I want to die. Dateline sort of says the worst of the worst. The fact is, if you are a police officer pretending to be a 14-year-old seeking sexual solicitation, you can get it. Any one of you can get it. But this is not what the teenagers are doing. In fact, they don't even recognize a lot of the sexual solicitations that are what we would normally talk about. They see it as just another dumb, sketchy guy trying to sell them something because they're so used to being marketed to that they relate those sexual contacts as marketing, and their approach is, you just delete that. Right? That's all they think about it. Interestingly, when I have them go through examples of sexual solicitation in the home, I've gotten more images or sort of feedback of Viagra ads. They see that as a sexual solicitation. So there's a little bit of confusion also as to what is spam and scamming and phishing and marketing, and what are sort of the problematic content that they receive. But most of the real sketchballs they delete unless they're actually seeking it out, and that's a whole separate version of what goes on. What goes on in terms of bullying also has a similar valence to it. Most of the bullying is happening by people that they know, unless they're a part of online communities where they're trying to get to know larger groups of people, because they don't tend to, hang out in places with unbelievable numbers of strangers. They're, even in a place like MySpace, where there is theoretically 170 million strangers there, their world, they don't search, they don't look around. They hang out, they go, and they immediately log in and check their messages, they talk to their friends, they reciprocate comments that they received. And most of the bullying that you see comes from, it's more women than men. It is, ways of negotiating status or controlling status within the school. A lot of times what you see is a continuation of the same patterns, even if it's not the same people of the offline places. Sibling games are intense. The interesting thing is how many people see their actions as pranks, not bullying. So most of it is that they're trying to just sort of joke around, and jokes go a little too far. And people, some of it is to the point of a little bit humorous. For example, I've been tracking what happens when people break up, like when, teenagers break up with one another. And so it's like, you break up with me and I get pissed off at you, so I'll start sending, as many SMS messages as I can so that you're in trouble with your parents. Right? This is this amazing tactic of trying to use the technology, and they don't even see that as bullying. They just see that as like, getting back at you for breaking up with me. So there's also some levels of confusion. When I look at what can be done, I have to say, the legislation proposals drive me mad. And the reason is that, regardless of whether or not things are technologically feasible, like age verification, the kids who are lying about their age are doing it for good reason. Often better reasons than their parents who are lying about it to look younger, right? Which is pretty common. But they're doing them to just sort of get away and to move away from the spaces, to move away from the advertisers who they see as their primary predator, right? Because they're constantly being solicited to by people who want to make money off of them. And so the age verification thing, it doesn't actually solve the relationship problem at all. Parental permission to be on these sites, oh my God, so many of the kids who are in most danger, parental permission will put them more at risk rather than less at risk. It's, the good kids already have parental permission. They were already having the conversations. In every positive household I've been to, there's a conversation between the parent and child. What I desperately, desperately, desperately want is street outreach, digital street outreach. We do this in the streets of our cities where kids who are running away, we go in and we talk to them. In some cities it means handing out condoms and clean needles at the most extreme cases. Some of it is much more relaxed and laid back and more like, hey, do you need some help? We do this with guidance counselors in schools. We do this with police officers when they're hanging out and they see kids sort of causing trouble on the streets. We don't have the digital street outreach that we need, which are not people that hold direct power over kids, not people that are going there to get them into trouble, but to make sure that they're okay. I've notified police all too often on kids who I look at and I go, uh-oh, problem. And almost always when I hear of a kid who's killed their parents or I hear a kid who's done other terrible things, I go to their profile and the signs were there. The signs were all extremely there. We all know the story with Columbine. It was all online. It was all reported to the press long before the incident took place, and the press did nothing. These kids are in trouble. They give huge signals of their difficulties, and this is an amazing opportunity for intervention because of the mirror and magnify. Because we can finally see what it is that teenagers are going through, instead of going around trying to obscure it, let's try to actually help them.
Well, what I'd like to do, thank you all for those opening comments. And what I'd like to do is actually go to Q&A. I have one question before we do, so if you can all think of what questions you have at the tip of your tongue, please get them ready. I want to ask a question about the profile of the kids that are getting into trouble, and if we can try to